Hello, BookTube. I've got a little bit of a discussion video for you today. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm asking way too much of your time today. I'll try to keep it brief. But a subject has come up, and then it has kept coming up. And it's on my mind, so I thought I would bring it up and raise it to you. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love thinking about these bookish things anyway, but I also love bringing them up to you because I get a ton of great comments in the comments field. I get a ton of emails, a ton of Voxer messages. I get exactly what I want, which is actually adjacent to making videos at all. Obviously, my videos are not technical marvels. They're not monetized. Really, it's the conversation that I love. And I am plugged into the right group of people because I get great conversations on all aspects of the subjects that I bring up. I want to do that today on one particular subject, which is negative reviews, negative book reviews. Because even if you don't read book review journals like the New York Times Book Review or the New York Review of Books or the TLS or whatever, you're still familiar with book reviews and probably write your share of them. We live in a review culture. Every place wants your feedback. If you're on Amazon or Goodreads or Storygraph, then you're writing reviews. And even if you're not, even if you're just doing stars, you're reading reviews. Plenty of them. So you're involved in this subject, even if you're not as involved as I am or as I might be. And weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a friend about negative reviews. He was frustrated because he had proposed a review to an editor, and the editor had greenlit it. And he wrote the thing, and it was a negative review, and the editor said, just pulled away from it. Said, I don't know, I don't know. Do we really need to do this? Do we really need to waste space if you didn't like the book this much? You didn't tell me ahead of time that you were going to hate the book. I might not have said yes. That editor was wishy-washy and got to the point of issuing a phrase from an editor that you do not want to hear if you are a freelancer. And that phrase is kill fee. You do not want to get an editor to talk about kill fees. You don't want to push them to that point. A kill fee is when the editor decides for whatever reason that they are not going to use the piece they've commissioned from you. Well, ethically speaking, they have to give you something for your time and effort. You didn't know ahead of time. You did the work. That was honestly entered upon. So a kill fee is generally half or 2/3 of the agreed commission that the editor is going to pay you anyway. And the reason you don't want to hear that is because book section editors, and I know here because I've known a lot of them, I've loved a lot of them, and I also am one and have been one many times. Book section editors are fairly simple creatures. They've got a lot of work to do and not a lot of time to do it in. Anyone who has a deadline will know that. So not a lot sticks in their mind. And you don't want to stick in their mind for negative reasons, because if you do something that sticks in a book section editor's mind, you're going to stick in their mind forever. Even if they force themselves to get over that, it's still going to be the first thing they think of when they see your name. And a lot of them don't force themselves to get over it. You are not, for instance, going to want to inconvenience a book section editor. That is a very, very bad idea, because they might have freelancers coming and going out the revolving door all the time, but if you bother them, they're going to remember you in a negative way. So, for instance, if you send a review that you've been commissioned to write, if you send a review to a book section editor and then the next day or 2 days later or 3 days later, you write them with a different version of the review because you didn't like how one sentence read, when it's understandable that they would have given it to a subordinate or started editing it or started formatting it themselves, right now suddenly you're telling them, don't use that version. They're going to remember that. They're not going to like it at all. They're not going to like that. No editor likes that. God forbid you go beyond the pale and do that multiple times. I know I've sent you 2 versions of this piece already, but I found a semicolon that I don't like. Use this version. That's very, very bad. You might be able to find a book section editor who will overlook that and not hold it against you, who will not say, all right, if this is your final copy, thank you very much. Don't contact me again for anything. You might find an editor who's willing to avoid doing that, but it'll be rare. Most of them only remember little things like that. They remember if you argue with them. You send them a piece, they say, look, I told you I needed 500 words. This is 1,500 words. If you write back to them with anything other than, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I have multiple irons in the fire, I forgot your limit, I'll have a 500-word version of that to you by the end of business today. If you write anything other than that, especially if you write back and say, I think it works better at 1,500 words, make the room. They're not going to do it, and they're going to remember that. That's what book section editor brains are like. They remember things. And uh, another thing that they remember is if they have to issue a kill fee. Then they're not going to want to deal with someone who made them do that, usually. So you don't want to do that. And my friend actually pushed that editor to the point where he was actually bandying that word. And that's when my friend knew to back off completely. And it was because he wrote a negative review. And then I saw a video on Owen's channel, Toasty Towns, where he made a video about hateful reviews. I'll leave a link to it if I can find it, if I can remember to do it. He points out in his video, there's a big difference between a negative critique and a hate review. And although I think the bulk of his video was designed to draw that distinction and say hate reviews really serve no useful purpose, unfortunately, by the time he got to the end of his video, and you got to keep in mind before you click on, if you're not familiar with his channel, before you click on his video, when Owen is in front of a camera, he's a very oscillating speaker. He's all over the place like this. So have your Dramamine handy when you watch. But by the end of his video, he sort of drifted into a kind of campfire, kumbaya, let's all love things thing, which of course doesn't work for me. But again, his video was about two different kinds of not liking a book. A hate review and a negative criticism. And then my friend Sam came over. My friend Sam is also a professional book reviewer. And he came over, and part of what we were talking about, both on camera and off camera, was negative reviews. When they're called for, how lucky you are if you get an editor who'll allow you to do it, and under what terms they'll allow you to do it, how bad you have to go to bat for something to be negative, and in what ways it can be negative. It got me thinking. All those things got together to make me think about negative reviews. And then the cherry on top, the piece de résistance, was a long, hour-plus negative review that I did today, that I did myself for this channel today. None of you are going to watch that video. It's about a comic book, but it was essentially one long rant, tearing something apart. And all of those things combined to get me thinking about negative reviews. And I want to ask you what you think when you encounter negative reviews. Because when we're talking negative reviews, there are basically, I know Sam mocked me for this kind of thinking, but that's just because he's jealous. There are basically two kinds. All right, so what? You already knew I was a hack. I've read more than anybody. I'm gonna lean on that a lot for the freedom to be a hack. And besides, I'm right. There are basically two kinds of negative reviews. There's the pan and there's the hatchet job. And if we look at two different examples, I'm sure they're readily available online. I'm sure you'll be able to find them. A hatchet job will be scorched earth, and it will feel personal. And for here, I'm thinking of Tibor Fischer's review of Yellow Dog by Martin Amis, a novel by Martin Amis. Fischer got a carte blanche, I guess. He just got a blank slate from his reviewer to write whatever he wants. And he wrote a hatchet job of Yellow Dog, which is a trivial work. It doesn't deserve a hatchet job. It isn't actually offensive. It's just not good. That's not the worst crime in the world. But it isn't just that Fischer tore the book apart. It's that he did it in a scabrous, personal way. If you know the review I'm talking about, you'll know the particular image that he summons. If you read the review, it will jump right out at you, and you will never be able to think of Martin Amis again without thinking of that image. And that image is extremely personal and extremely filthy. An editor had to sign off on that. And Amis hated it because he knew that it was the only thing anybody was going to think when he published another novel. They were going to think about that phrase, that image that Tibor Fischer summons. The book that he says makes you think of that image, I'm not going to say the image on this channel, but the book that he says makes you think of that image absolutely does not. It absolutely, Yellow Dog's not an embarrassment in any way. It's much less a scandalous one. It's just a book that hit him in a wrong way on a bad day. And he decided to write a hatchet job about it. That's the difference, I think, between a hatchet job and a pan, is that a hatchet job has that angry personal element. Whereas on the pan side of things, a negative review, something that leaves no stone on top of another stone, that is still annihilating a book, but not in that personal way, not quite the same. I always think of Colm Tobin, who did a review of Eduardo Albinati's big book, The Catholic School, in its English language translation. I think the English language translation was by Anthony Sugar, I think. was a big, fat book. I read it in galleys. I read it in finished copy. I loved it. I had my problems with it, but I loved it. I praised it. I pushed it on a whole bunch of other reviewers. And Tobin didn't like it at all. And not only did he not like it, he actively disliked it. And he wrote a dismantling review of it. When I get review journals in the mail on this channel, I always mention that I get butterflies in the stomach when I see a critic. I look at the table of contents first, I see a critic is reviewing a book that I've reviewed. The butterflies in the stomach come from wondering if the critic is going to find things that I didn't see, or come to a radically different conclusion than I did and maybe be more convincing about it. I make no bones about the fact that Colin Tobin is a much better writer than I am, of course, and his negative review of that book is far more convincing than my positive review of it. If you read the two of them side by side, the average reader is going to read the two of those things side by side and say, well, I haven't read the book and I don't know anything about it, but I know I don't want to read it now. But it won't be the same as the Tibor Fischer thing. There was nothing abjectly personal about Colin Tobin's review. It was just a dismantling of the book. That this is necrotic, that it's unhealthy, that it's inconsistent. It damns the book. You won't want to read The Catholic School when you're done with that review, but it's a different kind of negative review. And I think those are the two different poles of negative reviews. They fall under one or the other. I want to argue that both pans and hatchet jobs have useful purposes. Sam and I were mentioning this when we mentioned this on camera. Even a hatchet job is useful to the reader in signaling to them that the book had elements that could provoke this response. Generally speaking, you want to allot to the critic the baseline of honesty that they wouldn't just manufacture outrage that they're not feeling. I don't know Tibor Fischer. Maybe he did. I've known others who did. Toby Litt has done that from time to time. Dale Peck has done that from time to time. Manufactured outrage just because hatchet jobs make you briefly famous. I like to think we can rule that out and say that a hatchet job is coming from a place of genuine, towering annoyance. And it's useful to know that a work that you are considering buying and reading can generate genuine, towering annoyance in a seasoned critic. That, I think, is useful to know. Maybe not all that useful, but useful to know. Also, just on a bread and circuses level, hatchet jobs are often very entertaining to read. On the other side of the equation, the pan, a thorough takedown of a book, a thorough negative takedown of a book. There's nothing good about this book. Those, I think, can be self-evidently enormously useful. Because you can't do that with a book artificially. Again, we're allotting a certain amount of honesty to the critic. You can't do that to a book artificially. Some of those faults have to be there. You can't just manufacture them. That is very interesting and very thought-provoking. It helps you to register, okay, I read two other critics about this book, and they said things about it that got me thinking one way or another. But, and I don't care about the book one way or another. I'm not positively or negatively disposed to it. But some of the points that this pan is hitting, apart from the negativity, some of the points seem to me to be truer. Things I should pay more attention to. Again, regardless of whether or not the reviewer ends up liking the book, the irritation that the reviewer felt is helping me to see the book more clearly before I make my own decision about whether or not to try it. I think that's true. God forbid that I outlaw hatchet jobs or pan reviews, since I've written my share of both of them and really enjoyed it. I don't want to say that either one is forbidden. I certainly don't want to side with anyone who might say that hatchet jobs serve no useful purpose. I think they do. It just requires that you take a step back and take a look at it from a 30,000-foot distance and ask yourself, why is this happening? Why is this piece reading the way it does? And also coldly evaluate whether or not the writer of a hatchet job is just looking for their own headline, for their own 15 minutes of fame. That's the subject that I wanted to bring up, is negative reviews. We can roll those two things together into just negative reviews. And I want to know from you where you stand on this subject. What do you think of negative reviews? Either kind that I talked about. If you stumble into a long review, let's say in a journal instead of a short review on Amazon, or they can happen on Amazon and on Goodreads. I see them on Goodreads all the time. If you stumble onto a review and you immediately get the sense that this is not just a negative review, but a hatchet job, the writer of the review is attacking the book and the author. Do you discount it for that reason? Do you think, all right, well, Regardless of the good or bad points that you're making, it's obvious that you're not being objective. It's obvious that there's something going on here, and it sounds like it could be that the writer took your girlfriend. Or something ridiculous like that. Something that doesn't have anything to do with the merits or demerits of the book. So I'm going to ignore you completely. There's no way for me to know your history with the author, so I'm going to ignore this completely if you strike that tone. Are you like that with hatchet jobs? I'm assuming that most of you are very experienced readers. I'm assuming you're not like that with simple pans. That you wander into a review, you realize, okay, this reviewer does not like this book. They don't like anything about it. But you don't feel the same way, do you? That, okay, since they don't like it, I'm going to ignore them. No, right? It's Owen's point. The constructive negative criticism, even if it's sweepingly comprehensive, is still constructive. No or not? What do you think of that? Please don't tell me that any of you think that if you don't have anything nice to say about a book, don't say anything at all. Please don't tell me that. I have a living to make after all. But I want to know. I want to know from you, where do you stand on the whole subject of negative reviews? If, for instance, you write reviews on Goodreads or Storygraph or Amazon or whatever, do you make negative reviews? Some people that I know who've done that for years have a personal policy that if I didn't like a book, I'm not going to write anything about it. I'm not going to write any negative reviews. Do you ever do that? I guess the Goodreads colloquialism would be 1 star. Do you have a 1-star book? And tell why. Give your reasons why. Tell me all about negative reviews. I'm very nosy, especially when it comes to my own profession. So let me know where you stand on the subject. But anyway, that's a little thought-provoking subject for you on a rainy Saturday. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.